This has been a very, very long-running saga. I think it's got some way to run yet. The UK came straight back with the ruling and simply said, this changes nothing. The Foreign Office said, we completely reject any claim that Julian Assange is a victim of arbitrary detention. But, of course, the UN carries a lot of weight. There's quite a lot of moral weight behind that. And, therefore, should the UK say, yes, we agree to what the UN has actually said to us? Or do they say, no, it has no legal binding on us, and so we're just going to completely ignore it? And at the moment, they're just going to completely ignore it. OK, let's go to Geoffrey Robertson now. He's the founder of Doughty Street Chambers, and he's also, well, arguably the UK's leading human rights practitioner and expert. Very good evening to you, Mr. Robertson.
I think that would be very arguable.
No, I've followed your career with interest over the years, sir.
Nonetheless, Doughty Street acted for Mr. Assange.
Indeed.
In this case, so, there it is.
Well, there you are. So you're declaring an interest, and that's why you're one of the more reputable well,
that's why
members.
I read the judgment, which a lot of people haven't.
Well, I've read the judgment as well, Mr. Robertson. I can't find in it the reasoning of the three of the five about why he was arbitrarily detained, other than he was kept in solitary in Wandsworth.
Well, the importance of the judgment, which you'll see, is that it's mainly a condemnation of Sweden. The good news for the United Kingdom is that, apart from criticisms of keeping him in solitary confinement for 10 days in Wandsworth and for putting over severe bail conditions on him, the essential condemnation is of the Swedish abuse of the European arrest warrant procedure, in a way which, first of all, allowed a prosecutor, not a court, not a judge, to sign the warrant in the first place after the Stockholm prosecutor had rejected the allegations. It went to then a gender prosecutor, as she was called, and who was able on her own initiative to get Britain to arrest him. Now, this can't be done. The British Parliament put a stop to this in 2014. You may remember many Conservatives were concerned about abuse of the European arrest warrant. But that was too late for him, although the tribunal pointed that out. But they said the Swedes had rejected every opportunity of hearing his explanation and never given him a fair chance to explain himself, which he'd offered to do at Scotland Yard or at the Australian Embassy and so forth. So there were the real nub, if you like, of the case, if it turned on the abuse by Sweden of a European arrest warrant, which can no longer happen. If Mr. Assange were sought to be arrested today, the reforms that we made in 2014 would prevent that.
But if that is the nub, and if you think that the UK has got off relatively lightly and it's most about Sweden, I'm sorry, I've got it in front of me, the Working Group's arbitrary detention ruling, and I don't see many of those points being made.
Well, you see it in paragraph 97, and there are 5.
Okay, I will check. Thank you. I will check down.
The first one is that the Sweden didn't give him a chance to explain himself.
Well, yeah, but he does now have a chance to explain himself. If he would care to walk out, yes, the police will arrest him and they will send him to Sweden, at which point he can defend himself. But I wanted to go to the wider point, and this is what I think a lot of people don't understand, and I'm one of them. How is he arbitrarily detained when if he chooses of his own volition to go in there, he can choose of his own volition to leave?
Oh, yes, but this all started 5 years ago with the unlawful arrest warrant, which was issued by the Swedish prosecutor.
Well, it's a European arrest warrant backed up by Interpol.
No, it wasn't backed up by any court. Not any court. It was, if you like, look at General Lord Bramall, who's been so badly treated by our police. At least they didn't have the power to detain him for questioning and put him in prison while they questioned him. That was an exorbitant power and an unlawful power, And that is where all the problems have begun.
Okay, in law, sorry, Mr. Robertson,
Sure.
you remember you are the QC and I and most of us are not. In law, how is it that the Metropolitan Police, who have got this arrest warrant in front of them from a fellow member state of the European Union, Sweden...
No, from a prosecutor, from another policeman, in effect.
Well, okay.
See, that's the problem.
How can they say, no, we're not going to do this?
Oh, they can't, initially, of course, and that's why I don't think the United Kingdom is to blame for this. What they now, however, know, as a result of the tribunal's finding, is that the warrant was unlawful in the first place. Now, the prime responsibility for implementing this judgment is on Sweden. They should withdraw the arrest warrant. But if they don't, and I hope they will, because, of course, Sweden and Britain approve this tribunal, they support its judgments. Britain is the most, in terms of soft power, is the most influential and powerful country in the world because it is the country that most supports international law. And we would lose our reputation if we didn't respect the tribunal decision. And I think Sweden, too, must respect the tribunal decision. The obvious way is to withdraw the arrest warrant. If the Swedes do not do that, then Britain must consider whether, since it's an unlawful warrant, they have any... they should implement.
Okay.
You don't implement an unlawful warrant.
Sorry, Mr. Roberts. Last question, sir. And it's on that last answer you just gave. I accept your understanding of the UN ruling, but I don't see how the UN ruling, which is not binding, means that therefore, in law, the United Kingdom government has to instruct the Metropolitan Police to ignore the arrest order.
But wait a minute. It is binding. We accept all sorts of international...
Oh, OK. What's going to happen if we ignore it?
International law.
In what way is it binding? What happens to the UK?
Well, we can ignore international law, just like countries like Iran
Indeed.
and others, and we can go down the list in terms of our influence in the world, of course.
OK. Mr. Robinson, forgive me, I have interrupted you several times, and forgive me, we've just got to get another guest in quickly, but I really would like to thank you for putting forward a lot of points which I think have not been made in the media today, and which will certainly inform the discussion we're going to have. Thank you. Geoffrey Robertson, QC. Also joining us, Joseph Cottrey Monson, who's the director of Mary Monson Solicitors on Fleet Street. Hello to you, Mr. Cottrey Monson.
Good evening, Tim, and you must call me Joseph.
That's very kind of you, Joseph. You heard from Mr. Robertson. He made some very salient points, including that it is not an EU matter if it was not an EU state, but it was a prosecutor, and that he seemed to be arguing we need to bow to the UN's wisdom. Do you agree?
Very interesting area, Tim. I mean, the first question that anyone might ask, and I confess I asked the same question myself when I found out about the working group from the UN, because it's just so unusual, is if we have a system of extradition domestically, which has hearings, it has an appeals process, etc., it's governed by a treaty, how is it that the UN now can have some kind of standing after the fact to consider the legality of that? But actually, when you examine it, when you think about it, it's actually not that unusual or that bizarre. The answer lies, Tim, in the fact that both the principle of extradition in this case, but also our obligations under international law to the UN, are simply creatures of treaties that we have signed. So they're both governed by treaties. In one case, we've signed it with the UN regarding the legitimacy, I suppose, of ours and other nations' legal systems. And there are also treaties that we've signed in respect of extradition with those other countries. And, of course, it's a question of which treaty is dominant. And it's a difficult question to answer, but, of course, this is a process, the finding of fact by this panel. It's not just the report they've made. Submissions have been made by the UK government. They've engaged with this process. If they've engaged with it in that way, they've recognised the legitimacy of it. So for them to say, well, we've tried to win these proceedings, but actually we don't think we have to do anything, as Philip Hammond seems to be saying, well, I think that's slightly ingenuous.
Conversely, Mr. Assange went through the various legal proceedings, lost them all, and only when there was still certainly what the Swedish prosecutors believe is valid, an arrest warrant, did he jump bail. So,
yes.
I mean, it cuts both ways.
Well, I think that's what makes this case rather interesting, doesn't it, Tim?
Well, that's the thing about the law, isn't it?
You know, in the law of equity, I was taught at law school one must come to the table with clean hands, and there's an argument there, isn't there, that Assange has lost a degree of credibility in that regard, going through a legal process, having defied the earlier legal process. Let me say this, however, what we haven't talked about today, and what must be on most most fairly suspicious people, like I'm a suspicious person whenever governments are involved, I imagine a lot of listeners are the same. A lot of people listening to this are probably thinking, well, this is all very well, but what is this case really about?
But hang on, okay, let me jump ahead of you, and that might well be the fear of him going to Sweden and suddenly the Americans want him, and before you know it, he's got 50 years in an orange jumpsuit in a maximum security jail.
Isn't it very interesting?
Well, yeah, but that's an assumption, and in law, I'm not sure you can put that on the table because there's not a shred of evidence for it.
Absolutely not. But you know what? If something stinks and smells, then usually it's a certain type of substance.
Right, Joseph, let me ask you this difficult legal question. We have to take the break because it's Friday, and we need to get the travel, which I always look out for on a Friday. Are you available to hang on and talk to us afterwards briefly?
Absolutely.
That is extremely kind of you, Joseph Cottrey-Monson. I'm Tim Marshall, in for Ollie Mann. This is LBC. It's 7:17. Well, the things that make me love and hate law equally and at the same time, simultaneously, is that it is interpretation, a lot of it. And we've heard from Geoffrey Robertson some fascinating insights into the interpretation of the ruling by Mr. Assange. Today he's threatened legal action against the United Kingdom. The UN report says he was unfairly held. It even says he should receive compensation. So has the UK actually been shamed by this UN ruling, or you actually think, well, hang on a minute, why, A, should the UK legal system be moribund by what a UN body says? And anyway, he jumped bail. What about the passage of law, the way it should go? Call us 0345 6060 973. Text us 84850. Tweet at LBC. Go to the calls in just a minute, but Joseph Cottrey-Monson has been kind enough to hang on from Mary Monson Solicitors. Joseph, I thought that Geoffrey Robertson QC really brought up some things that made me slightly rebalance some of the things I'm thinking. One was his argument that the original arrest warrant is not by the application to have him arrested is from a prosecutor in Sweden, but that still doesn't get the Metropolitan Police or the British government off the hook of doing their duty and responding to a fellow EU country's request for an arrest and an extradition, does it?
No, absolutely not. And I think it's important to recognise that of the three parties here, the three nations involved, if you are, hopefully not a conspiracy theorist, but somebody with a little bit of healthy suspicion, the US, the UK and Sweden, because I think we all know that this is about extradition to the US long term. I don't think anyone's so naive as to imagine it's not.
Prove it.
Well, let's see what happens if he goes to Sweden. I'll bet you a monkey. There are serious flaws in the way this process has been conducted by Sweden. And the reason I say that is this. On a European arrest warrant, it is incredibly easy to extradite somebody. The bar is very low. You need very little information. As a result of that, the only remedy is that if you are a requested person, someone's trying to extradite you, you can rely on the fact, or you should be able to rely on the fact, that the rules and the spirit of the process are interpreted very stringently and have to be obeyed by the extraditing country to the letter. And it's right, the criticism is on Sweden, not on the UK, because the reality is that this court is processing this in the appropriate way as far as the UN panel is concerned. It's Sweden's haste for whatever reason, and it strikes me that perhaps we won't agree necessarily on whatever reason, ulterior or otherwise, that is, but for whatever reason, Sweden doesn't even seem to have appeared its normal own procedure. I wonder why that is.
Well, Joseph, you have brought up another related issue, and that is, yes, how easy it is to be extradited. I mean, it's quite frightening, the lack of evidence that is required against a British person for them to be whisked out of the country. In fact, that's probably going to be, that really ought to be the subject of another phone-in sometime.
Let me say this very, very quickly.
If you could.
We are up in arms as citizens when one of ours is extradited, especially to Europe. We don't believe in their justice systems in the way we believe in our own, because we know our own justice system and we know it's good. You know, it can't be one rule for our own citizens. And, well, listen, it's Assange, it's some big political thing. We don't know much about it. The rules shouldn't be interpreted as stringently. You know, the reality is now the boot is on the foot of the Secretary of State. He has the final word. What will be his next move? Are we going to be, Tim, the 51st state, or are we a nation in the UN?
Oh, provocative. Anyway, I'll tell you what he's going to say. He's going to say this changes nothing, because he's already said it. Joseph Cottery Monson of Mary Monson Solicitors, thank you so much.